RiverWise was born out of the COVID crisis, basically. We were shut down, like the rest of this whole country and this world, in the beginning of the year. We had planned the most ambitious year we had had to date. It was full of programs. We had learned a lot of hard lessons. We knew exactly what we wanted to do. We had a new tour boat that we knew how to program on, a floating classroom. We had incredible other programs going on, and everything stopped in March. That situation of COVID made us have to rethink of how we could educate people. How can we re-educate people when we're not open?
We wanted to do something positive. It was a moment when everyone was feeling scared and there was a lot of distance. Our boats are normally things that connect people. They connect people to the river in the programming that we do. And we felt, it felt really bad, honestly, to not be doing that.
We were inspired by Clearwater, Apollonia, which was here at the time, and our boat Solaris, a solar boat. And we thought, that's outreach right there.
We decided we should do something. And RiverWise is what that something became, which was, okay, people can't safely get aboard the vessel, but that doesn't mean we can't do exactly what we're doing. We just have to rely on virtual and digital through the internet.
We did it in 2 legs. We did Kingston to Albany and back in June, and then we did Kingston to New York City and back in August. And my goal as Director of Exhibits and Outreach was really to connect people to the history of the Hudson River. We really came up with the term RiverWise to think about helping people understand the river in more of a holistic sense, like not just the history, not just the ecology, but everything all combined: the history, the ecology, the geography, the geology, what it's like to sail on the Hudson River, the sailing conditions, how the landscape affects the weather, kind of tying that all into the heritage of living in the Hudson River Valley and sailing on the Hudson River.
We had only 2 weeks to plan the first part of the trip, which was wildly insufficient time. I mean, it was really funny to think about the fact that we decided that was a good idea, because we had to plan not only where we were going to stay every night and who was going to go and what they were going to do, but who we were going to talk to, who was going to film it all.
For the short crew, as we call ourselves, the history department, the historians, getting all of this vast amount of information, finding it, getting it written down, kind of making it accessible for the crew and for the general public was a real push.
The Hudson River's history is pretty vast and very detailed, so we needed to focus it down a little bit. We ended up with 2, we call them landmark guides, one for the north half of the trip and one for the south half of the trip.
Every inch of the river was documented in these books, so you could look to one side or the other of the river and know that there was a cement plant there that you needed to talk about, or a brick company, or there's a lighthouse, and all the information was in there, and they had it all tracked out on a Google map, and it was amazing. They really made it possible for us.
Traveling by sail, the method is ancient, and we're doing it the same way that it's always been done, and with the same problems and the same joys that it's always been done with. So you really get a sense of connectivity with the past doing it that way. So quite a few times we arrived at places that were on the historical record because of trouble, and we experienced the same trouble, which was really interesting because, you know, there's a particular island that has a particularly tricky navigational point to it, and you know, our history book said here is the site of a wreck in 18 whatever, and there we were in a very similar style boat dealing with the exact same problem. So there was this connectivity that was cool. And down in Peekskill, there's the historical story about an imp that lives in the mountain, and it's a geological feature that causes these freak windstorms, and it's like one of these colloquial myths of you have to respect the goblin in the woods or he'll send a squall at you. Sure enough, we didn't doff our hats to the goblin and we got hit with a squall.
Water in the cockpit.
The Solaris is really a very beautiful boat, and it's kind of a metaphor for the Hudson River Maritime Museum and all museums in a way too. The boat is built along traditional lines with a displacement hull. Looks very much like a 19th century steam launch or naphtha launch, and yet its other foot is in the future, the same way a museum has its foot in the past, valuing our heritage and also looking ahead to the future where we want to educate people and create a better environment.
We learned a lot about Solaris on the trip. I used to baby the boat a little more than I did after that trip. The amount of power storage on board and also the ability of the panels on a nice sunny day to recharge is pretty impressive. We were able to be a little more aggressive in the maneuvering and not have to worry, not have that fuel gauge anxiety. She just always had a full charge.
Yeah, Solaris is a very cool boat. It's unlike any other boat I've ever driven. It's kind of more like a sailboat than your classic motorboat. It takes a lot of focus. We're like constantly checking what our levels are and seeing if we can have the most efficient ride possible, like keep the straightest line and like go at exactly the right speed. And so that was really fun to play around with. It was a lot of quality time with Solaris.
I think one thing that's probably apparent to people who are watching it, but maybe not, is that obviously like we were learning along with them, right? It wasn't like some of these sort of like YouTube tutorials or like documentary films where you are the expert and I'm gonna share all my information with you. I think what was so engaging about it was how it was genuine and honest, and it was a genuine, honest exploration. And we were on an exploration, and so was everyone along with us.
Here we are on RiverWise southbound towards New York City, and we are passing by Stony Point, which sits on top of a rocky peninsula, and it marks the entrance of Hudson Highlands. It's at the northern point of Haverstraw Bay.
During the American Revolution, Stony Point was the location of King's Ferry. In May 1779, British troops captured Stony Point and began to construct an earthen fortress intended to disrupt Washington's Continental Army.
I think people always are interested in the river. The river is enormously important to the history of our area and our country. And people want to learn more about it, but they want to do it in a engaging, interactive way. And they don't always have access to that. And I think that's really what RiverWise brings to the public.
It was great to learn the boat as we learned the river.
All right, tighten up on the headsails.
And then of course to engage with people, sharing what we're learning, and then also meet people and learn from them. So, I mean, it was like a meta learning experience.
Water Witch, this is Apollonia. Nice to see you. We were just about to film this beautiful ice house, and for those listening at home, Water Witch is our good friend John Palmer. What the heck are we looking at?
Yeah, so you guys have that nice brick chimney on camera right now, and that's actually the remnants of what was once a much larger ice house.
This is something that was happening in, I think, a really tough time for a lot of people. By the time we were in June, we'd been in lockdown for a couple of months, and it was nice out, and I think people were going a little stir crazy. and I think they really appreciated having this sort of adventure, this daily adventure, posting sometimes as many as 12 times a day on Facebook, and it was this interesting thing that there was always something to read and look at and follow along with and share, and I think that was one of the most valuable parts of RiverWise.
We were quite the spectacle, and every time we stopped in a new town or even just went by a park, people would look after us, and we got actually a lot of pictures submitted of people who had just seen us go by, and it really made people interested.
Those are some of my favorite interactions, is just like the afternoon fisherman who's like coming down to their favorite fishing dock, which is like almost always empty, and all of a sudden there's like this weird big old schooner there with full of people with some stories to tell, trying to ride a tricycle across a bridge to get cider. I don't look at what we're doing as like an alternative to going out on the water. I hope it's the beginning of getting people excited about going out on the water, and I think that's important. It's not like, now you have the YouTube video, It's like hopefully you saw something on that video that got you excited enough to get your canoe and go out and explore it yourself. Then RiverWise is working, if that's happening. I think RiverWise has been a huge success in terms of what we're able to do while underway, engaging people, sharing our stories, the daily updates, the small problems, the big problems, you know, all of that is great. But then we also were able to gather really, really detailed, extensive interviews that are not, it's not just like a quick Facebook video.
There's so much footage that people haven't seen that yet, that we're still processing, like terabytes of footage. We're going to be able to use that footage to create professional documentary films about the things that we saw along the way, the people we interviewed, the history, the stories that the Hudson River has to offer.
How do we share these kinds of videos with other people is a real challenge, and it's something that we need some support, and we need to dial in as we move this project forward. As much as it was great to do it on a COVID year, to create a connection for people who would have a hard time having it otherwise, it'll be just as great to do it on a non-COVID year when people can come meet us at the waterfronts and we can do public events and welcome people on the boats. The cultural exchange from town to town has the ability to grow in a non-COVID year, and the exploratory nature will persist regardless.
Hi everyone, thank you for watching our documentary. The first RiverWise voyage turned out to be a real adventure full of surprises. We set out to capture fascinating stories of life and history along the river, and we did just that, meeting people from all walks of life and filming amazing historical sites. What became apparent to us all was the enormity of our goal. It is easy to forget that the river flows over 315 miles from its start in the Adirondacks to its terminus in New York Harbor. On this voyage, we traveled only half of that length, and we only just begun to capture the stories of the river. When we started this trip, we didn't really know what to expect, but we now understand that the RiverWise 2020 voyage is just the first chapter of many more to come. We learned that there's so many stories to tell, and we can't wait to take you on our next trip. Please support our documentary film program at hudsonriverwise.org. Thank you for your support.